So join with me in Lamentations chapter 3, verse 37. And I um, did a short film on this earlier, but I kept on feeling, like an heavy urge, like the Lord was still calling me to like make a like a full length video um talking about Lamentations 3 verse 37. Um Before I get started though, I want to share with you quickly, and I done a terrible job of self promoting my book that I self published through um Amazon. It's called Bewley, a comedy series, and it's just season one. So it's Bewley, a comedy series, season one that you can get on Amazon. And I once had copies of it, but through my discouragement, I kind of ripped up and tore up the copies, so I no longer have copies, so I can't show you that that book that I self-published. But you go to Amazon, you type in Bewley, a comedy series, season one, it should pop up. Um, and I just hadn't done a very good job. I kind of there was a time that I got very discouraged, so I kind of ripped up all those, um, like the book, um, the copy that I had, and I just stopped for a really long time. Stopped um, trying to even promote that book, but and but yeah, like I'm just going to, I guess, I guess you can say he kind of refreshed, or, you know, I don't know how would you say that? Like he just kind of put that, back into my spirit, like, well, maybe I should, get back to promoting um Bewley, a comedy series, season one. Um, and so, yeah, you can, hopefully you will check that out. So, anyways, with that said, let me get started. So, Lamentations 3, verse 37, and just simply going to talk about 37. Um, I might read on, 38 and 39 also, but it's mainly, these verses. So, starting in 37, who can command things to happen? So, this is asking who can command things to happen without, that's a very key word there, without the Lord's permission. So, who can command things to happen without the Lord's permission? saying that even Satan himself has to ask the Lord for permission. But also, think about this, also, it doesn't storm without the Lord's permission. So think about that. Like, who is the creator of storms, right? Nothing happens without the Lord's permission. So trouble and disaster doesn't happen without. So if you're somebody that goes through trouble, like trouble time, go to this verse. Who can command the troubled time without the Lord's permission? Right? So, think about it. The Lord's permission. He gives permission for it to storm. And this can be a prophetic storm, or it can actually be a literal storm. I'm talking in both sense. I'm talking both like a literal storm and a prophetic storm. And then in 38 it says, does not the Most High send both calamity and good? Like, does God not send destruction, but also send blessing? Then why, this is 39, then why should we mere humans complain when we are punished for our sins? So I kind of spoke on this a little bit earlier in the short film, and I talked about storms, and I was in the short film, I was talking about literal storms, but here I'm talking about both prophetic storms, but then also a literal storm that could happen, like oftentimes. And then also I'll add other things. Oftentimes we look at storms and we go, oh well, that's just so-called, like, you heard the term mother nature. Like, yeah, like we often think of storm, well, that's just mother nature, so to speak. And I don't really believe in that, but we kind of throw storm, and not to say that storms is God's way of rebuking all the time. Not saying that they're, because, like, you don't want to get into a world where it storms every single time and you're going, well, it's God's, like it could be. It really could, like, but not every storm is like a judgment. Like, however, here's what I'm saying is, at what point do we start to understand that God can use a storm to speak to us? So this can be a prophetic storm in your life, or this can be a actual, like, storm. At what point do we realize that God could be like he could be speaking in a storm? Like he can use a storm to speak to you. Okay? And for example, and I'm going to tell you something that happened to me. So this doesn't necessarily have to be a storm, but like oftentimes we look at storms, we go, "Oh, it's just a storm." But then there's other things that we go, "Oh, well, that's just a coincidence." And I'm going to tell you a story of a time where I could have just said, "Oh, well, that was just a coincidence," but instead I allowed that moment, I allowed this thing to, like, God to speak to me through this thing. I, at one time, and this was not too long ago, this was probably only like a month or so ago or something like that, where I had decided to put fruit, like frozen fruit, in a bowl. I heated it up, and then I was like, I kind of feel like having chocolate with that, but you know, I don't have like the chocolate syrup or anything like that. All I had was chocolate chips. And I was like, I can put these chocolate chips in the microwave for, like a few seconds, and, like they'll melt into, and I did that. They didn't really melt. I mean, they kind of, but not really how I thought. So then I kind of got impatient, and I, you know, put them on for X amount of time. I forget how much. On, I think it was 30% power or 20% power. Well, I started to, smell something, but I didn't really think about, it didn't, for some reason, for whatever reason, it didn't, the, smell, like it wasn't resonating. It didn't, like, for some reason, the bell didn't go off in my mind. But I started smelling this, this smell, and this smell, started getting worse. But then I eventually was like, well, I should probably check up on the chocolate has been in the microwave for a while. I should probably check. And boy, it was burnt. I tell you, the chocolate was burnt. And you could be like, there's two things that you can, take from this that you can say at this moment. At this moment, you can go, well, that's just coincidence. And I could have said, oh, well, that's just coincidence. Oh, well, that's just my stupidity. I could have blamed it on my stupidity. And oftentimes, when it storms, we go, oh, and that's just a storm. And sometimes it is. Sometimes a storm is just a storm, but I mean, it can't always just be just a storm. And here's what I'm saying, like, we can say that burning chocolate inside a microwave is just our own stupidity. But let me read this again. Who can command things to happen without the Lord's permission? So, even though through my stupidity I burnt the chocolate that I put in the microwave, like, who was the one that permitted that to happen? Like, who was the one that caused my stupidity in the first place? God. God was the one who, caused me to have this stupidity so that I would accidentally burn chocolate. Why? So I would be able to smell this burnt chocolate. God wanted to use my stupidity to burn chocolate so I can smell what the burnt chocolate smelt like. And I will tell you what, it smelt like this is what God told me. He said, this is what hell smells like. And guess what? Guess what happened from there? I repented. So there, like before, there was a sin issue, and God allowed this stupidity. He allowed these weird, stupid thoughts of, oh, let me put this chocolate in the microwave and, see what happens. He allowed the stupidity to speak to me about my sin at that point. So God can use anything to speak to you. You just have to allow God to speak to you through the chocolate. Stop making a excuse saying, well, that's just stupidity. Well, it is stupidity. But who is the one that caused that stupidity? Do you follow where I'm going? Like, who is the one that caused the stupidity? Let me read this again. Who can command things to happen without the Lord's permission? So the Lord is the one that caused the stupidity. It's the Lord that causes it to rain, storm, right? And so if it is the Lord that causes storms in our life, whether they would be literal storms or prophetic, we need to stop making excuses and going, oh, well, that's just another storm. I mean, it could be, but if we took the time to maybe say, Lord, what are you saying through this storm? What are you trying to tell me through this storm? God can, He will then tell you. So the next time that it storms, whether it's prophetic or a literal storm, ask the Lord. Say, what are you trying to tell me through this storm? And allow God to speak to you through that storm. There's another time, and I'll close with this. I forget how many years it was, but it was, I don't know, I forget how many years because I forget exactly what year it was. But I got asked to, so this was when I lived in South Central Illinois, basically my hometown where I grew up. There was usually two people that often, during Good Friday, they would carry they had an actual cross that they, not just a small wooden cross, that they, like, this was actually like almost, I mean, not the exact replica of the cross that Jesus carried, but this was like literally, like, you can pretty much say that it was almost a replica. I mean, not technically, but it was a cross that was really heavy, and so, but there was one person that, like, on this particular year, there was one person that couldn't do it. And so one of the, and I don't know, I can't even remember how they, asked, like, oh man, like, but anyways, I was asked to, carry the cross to, help them, and I said yes. Anyways, we get down and we pass, like, on the sidewalk, we pass this rose that is sticking up through the crack of the sidewalk. This rose with thorns. And he asked me, do I believe in coincidence, or, and I was kind of confused on what he was asking me at the time, so I said, oh, like, coincidence. I was kind of confused on what he was asking me, but what he was asking me is, do I believe in that rose was just a coincidence, or was it a message, like some kind of, like, divine message from God? And but later I begin to think, okay, a rose doesn't typically sprout up in, like, a crack of a sidewalk. And there, that day on, Good Friday, we were carrying the cross, and we get to a spot where on the sidewalk there's a crack, and there's literally a rose with thorns that has, I guess, somehow sprouted up in the crack. You gotta, like, if you're somebody that just excuses that as coincidence, go back and think, well, what are the chances? What are the odds, right? And that's the question that I, think about today is, what are the odds of that happening? Like, how can that be coincidence when the odds are not in the favor of a rose? And it's not even spring, like it's also not even like, yeah, kind of like spring has happened, or but technically Easter, so you plant flowers kind of like in the spring, but like flowers don't typically bloom until later in the spring, right? Like, it's just like, in obviously, yeah, there are some flowers that you can plant, in early spring, and they, sprout, pretty early. Um, but typically, the majority of the flowers that you plant are not going to sprout until like later. And here, not like, not just that, not just, it's very odd because the time of year. I mean, not only the time of year, but where it was. So it's just, that's one of the things that you have to consider is, well, how can that be mere coincidence, right? How can that be mere coincidence when the odds are not in the like, so again, not just because of where the rose had sprouted up, but the time of year. I mean, typically, yeah, there are some, flowers and things that bloom in early mid spring, but like typically, I mean, there are a lot of flowers that don't bloom until later. So it's not just where, it's also like the time of year. The time of year, it was not really typically. You see roses sprouting up like where there's a sidewalk. Normally, there's weeds that sprout up, not a flower, not a rose. But then the time of year probably would be too early for a rose to sprout. And so, that's not coincidence. And so that's what I'm saying. It's like we can either say, oh, well, it's coincidence. We can blow it off and say it's coincidence. We can blow it off and say, oh, it's just a storm. We can blow it off and say, well, it's just our stupidity. But have you read Lamentations 3:37? Who can command things to happen without the Lord's permission? So it would have been the Lord's permission that that rose sprouted where it sprouted, the time of year that it sprouted, right? It would have been the Lord, right? The Lord would have caused my stupidity. And the Lord also is the one that causes storms, right? So let me talk about this one last thing before I close. Yes, there is, some people, and I can only speak to the United States. There's a very possibility that here in the United States they do, manipulate the weather, right? Because you have your global warming activists, right? And you'd be like, well, you're blowing smoke, you're blowing, like, they're not doing that, yada yada yada. I don't remember what year it was, but I believe it was 20 somewhere between 2012 or 2014. I did see like a show on TV done by global warming activists, saying how the government would have to decide to take airplanes and helicopters and spray Herofrost in the Earth's atmosphere to fight against global warming. And I have seen videos of airplanes and helicopters spraying, and these are military helicopters, and these aren't your airplanes that swoop down to a field and spray chemicals onto a field. No, they're up in the sky and they're spraying. I've seen videos of that. I haven't necessarily seen that with my own eyes, but I have seen videos of that. And so I'm put two to two together, like, obviously what they're spraying is Herofrost. Obviously, we've gotten to the point where probably the government has probably already in secret made the decision to spray Herofrost to, like, in the atmosphere. And so yeah, there is some of that going on. But I have to say this for the global warming activists. Do you think that the globe is warm? Like, obviously, if the globe is warming, let's go back to this verse. Go back to this verse. If the globe is getting warmer, let's go back to this verse, Lamentations 3:37. Who can command things to happen without the Lord's permission? So if the globe is getting warmer, obviously that would still be the Lord's doing. That would still be God. He made the decision to allow the earth to warm. Like, so they think that they're doing their due diligence to try to fight against global warming, but guess what? And yeah, to some extent, their, manipulation, like, to control the Earth's climate, to some extent might work to some extent, but guess what? In fact, if the Lord, like if there is global warming, it would be the Lord's doing. So if it's the Lord's doing, who can stop it, right? And so it's just a matter of time before their so-called plan to fight global warming fails. Because it's simply the Lord's doing, Lamentations 3:37. Let me read it just one more time and then close. Who can command things to happen without the Lord's permission?